So now, with no further ado, I would like to introduce our first speaker, William Kearns. And as you can see on the screen, Bill is the president, the current president of the International Society for Gerontechnology. And he is a distinguished scholar with over 70 publications in the area of technology and aging. He was president of our 11th World Conference, which was held in Florida in 2018. So now, Bill, would you please give us your words this morning?
The title of our talk this morning is Using Gerontechnology to Reconnect Family Networks for Elders that are Isolated by Coronavirus. As was mentioned earlier, I am the president of the International Society for Gerontechnology, and it's a great pleasure for me to be here. It comes as no surprise the world's population's been aging significantly. Chronic health problems have become the norm for older adults as they reach a greater age. Health issues such as obesity, hypertension, and chronic obstructive pulmonary disease have increased the vulnerability of this population to the recent pandemic. At the same time, older adults are increasingly being found not only in independent living arrangements, but also in assisted living facilities and nursing home care facilities. Coronavirus can be traced to the Wuhan, China area, and it's believed to be spread by close physical contact, that being less than 2 meters. It's created many unanswered questions, such as its origin, the incubation period, the fact that it may be transmitted from one individual to another by individuals who may not even know that they have the disorder. The symptoms include headaches, aches and pains, chills and fever, and a dry cough. The advanced syndrome includes severe respiratory distress, low blood oxygen saturation, pneumonia, scarring of lung tissue, and damage to internal organs. Once an individual has been placed on a respirator, the survival rate drops to about 20%. Fatalities from the disease are higher in individuals who are senior citizens, obese, and hypertensive. The disease has a number of unknowns, such as when an individual ceases to be infectious, can an individual be reinfected, as well as can a person who is asymptomatic infect other people. There is currently no effective treatment or cure. And while many research facilities are working very hard to create a vaccine, the estimates for the time required to create a vaccine are variable and range from 1 to 2 years. As a result, the response has been multi-pronged. The use of face masks is widespread, as is large-scale disinfection of facilities and the implementation of social distancing and quarantine for persons who are suspect of being infected. In order to obtain an index of the true infection rate, countries have instituted mass testing with the intention of determining the level of herd immunity. While social distancing has reduced the transmission of the disease, it's also an adverse effect has been to vulnerable individuals' maintenance of chronic healthcare conditions. Authorities place strict limits on the numbers of individuals who may congregate in one place, with an insistence that masks be worn to reduce the probability of transmission. Most older adults in the U.S. Live in nuclear families and are empty nesters. One of the things that we're routinely told is if you don't live with them, don't visit them. This is a warning typically given. Unfortunately, that bears with it the isolation that comes along with not being able to see one's family or the like, especially if you're not living with them directly. So social distancing and isolation have resulted in a flattening of the curve, but it's taking a toll on the psychological well-being of older adults, where they are isolated from their families and from their grandchildren and their normal social networks. Travel outside the home is discouraged except for medical care and the purchase of essentials. Even the smallest comfort of a simple human touch is forbidden, as people are encouraged to keep a distance of at least 2 meters between them and other people. Ordinarily, this severe isolation would be made much worse by the lack of communication technologies that facilitate reconnection of family members with loved ones and caregivers. Fortunately, a field of study has evolved over the past 30 years by scholars in healthcare, engineering, social sciences, and other related fields related to the creation of an academic discipline called gerontechnology, whose goal is the application of technology to help people live to a great age and to do so with dignity and in good health. Researchers in gerontechnology around the world make significant contributions to this field every day. Much of the seminal work was conducted in the Netherlands at the Technical University of Eindhoven and in Finland through the Ministry of Health and Vapu Taipale. The ISG core principles and values support the well-being of adults through the use of technology to help them remain embedded in their socio-cultural environment. Our outreach efforts are many. The Society provides much needed information on the use of technology by older adults, including human factors work to design new information and communication technologies that are easy for adults to use. The information is shared freely with the citizens of the world through our free journal, which is online at the address shown on the screen. We also hold biannual conferences that are held around the world. The next one will be held in Trondheim, Norway, and you'll learn more about that in the next presentations. There are a number of misconceptions about older adults and their ability to use technologies. One of these is, of course, that simply older adults can't learn to use the new technologies. Well, we know that this is false. Older adults do use cell phones and computers, and they do have network access. Many of them already access online services to interact with their physicians and family members. They also have misconceptions floating about that older adults are homogenous in their technology skill level, and that's not true either. Older adults vary very significantly in their ability to use technology. Many of these individuals who have recently retired were quite adept at using technology in their working years, and they still browse the web, use email, and use Twitter and other social media. Another misconception is that the older adults have all got disabilities that prohibit technology use, and that's another falsity. While it's true some older adults have sensory and physical limits, these technologies allow more communications options. For example, text-to-speech converters and speech-to-text converters allow audio and visual channels to be swapped for people who might have hearing limitations or vision limitations. One must always remember that the technology options for communications vary widely. The most basic functionality of the telephone has been around for over a century and very well known to quite a few people. The information that is carried in the human voice, the intonations, the pauses, and the emotional qualities can provide invaluable information about the mental state of the person that you're conversing with. Electronic mail and short messaging service texts are also routinely used by many older adults, as well as the more popular Twitter and Facebook options for communicating with family and taking part in shared events. However, the downside is that text-based mediums can be misinterpreted because they are by their nature cold mediums that do not convey well the human emotion, intonation, and so forth that is carried within the human voice. More recently, video conferencing software has become ubiquitous, and it's relatively inexpensive and perhaps even free to individuals, and has been used to create family gatherings of dozens of people simultaneously, especially for tools such as Zoom. The inclusion of video as well as audio signals provides even more information than voice alone, and provides more information about how an older adult who may be struggling with isolation is doing. Not only do you hear in the audio signal the quality of the intonation, but you also have some means of providing reassurance that the individual is looking well. So the sight and sound together also provide extra information that you might not receive otherwise. One well thought out video conferencing technology that I just briefly want to describe is the AgeWell Network Centers of Excellence product that has been developed recently for older adults directly, called FamilyNet. This product has been made in conjunction with universities throughout Canada. The AgeWell Network Centers of Excellence has been a very well-funded and supported governmental effort to bring about high technology for the use of older adults throughout the world. This, of course, is only one of these types of video conferencing technologies developed around the world, but we wanted to draw your attention to it here today. One of the things that many people don't consider is the fact that you can engage with older adults through the use of gaming. We typically think of gaming as being just something for younger people that they can get really into, but it turns out that older people game quite a lot too. We have found, for example, that they're very likely to play with family members in other states. So while they may be living alone, be empty nesters, they can still interact meaningfully and play these games over a day-long period. Some typical conversions of games like Scrabble and Monopoly that we grew up with before the internet have been modified and are made available now at little or no cost to anyone who wants to play these games online with their family members and children. These also have typically some kind of a chat feature which allows you to converse with the person that you're playing the game with. So even if you're not in the same room with them, you can be at another country for that matter, you can still engage and have meaningful interactions over fun activities like games. Since it may be possible for a person to spread the virus without even knowing that they have it, some congregate facilities have instituted a lockdown that prevents family members from even entering the facility to visit. Although older adults in these facilities may themselves not be familiar with technology, staff members in these facilities have been taking the unprecedented step of bringing iPads and other types of technologies into the assisted living facilities and nursing homes to allow their families to reconnect with people who are being protected within these facilities. This has been done recently in a New York Times article, was a description of it, and they've actually seen increases in the amount of time spent with the older adult who is being protected in the nursing home. In some cases, as much as 100% increase in family interactions that previously were not nearly as great. Finally, these very same tools that have been used to reconnect the older adults with family members and the like, and their caregivers, have been used more frequently in the pandemic for telemedicine activities. These include the ability to interact with one's physician and have face-to-face consultations via Skype and other tools that negate the requirement to have the older adult exposed to risk as they're transferred from the assisted living facility to a care facility. So to the extent that these can be these activities can be done, and can be done well via a camera on a pad or on a phone. This can, again, reduce the likelihood that the individual will be exposed to people carrying the coronavirus. So, in conclusion, if there is a silver lining to this pandemic, it's that it's removed many of the barriers to the implementation of ICT for the benefit of older adults that are living alone or in congregate settings. Electronic access has transitioned from a want to a need. And with this transition, the motivation to use it becomes quite intense by all the parties concerned. No longer is the older adult using technology as a favor to a family member in order to improve communication, but they're doing it because now it's the only way to really communicate with the outside world. And if you don't use it, you're kind of up the creek. So at this point, we'll put the floor open for questions, and I thank you very much.
Well, that was a most interesting talk, Bill, and certainly I can identify with some of the things that you said. Since this virus came into place, I've been doing story time with Grandma, with my granddaughter who lives 3,000 miles away. And certainly in our province, we've seen an increase in use of telemedicine, and funding is now being provided to enhance that. Can you tell me, and as the first question, and I hope other people will join in and type in their questions, what enhancements are needed to improve the tolerance of older people who are isolated to using the technologies, the new stuff that's out there?
Well, that's a great question, and thank you, Gloria. When we look at these technologies, they have been, in large part, enhancements on existing technology that was developed in the last century. For example, the first being the telephone, if you will, which was able to communicate voice. And from that, as I mentioned, you get intonation, you get information about pauses, how a person's voice is, how strong it is, whether it wavers. There's a lot of things that are encoded in that signal. Likewise, when video became possible in the latter part of the last century, we had the opportunity to see another individual, and we could see if they looked wan, or they had not been eating, or looked undernourished, or perhaps something about the state of the place that they were living in, as far as, is it cluttered, or is it being kept clean? These types of background information can be gathered from that. But one of the things that human beings absolutely require, and which is missing, unfortunately, is the sense of touch. And that has never been more clear than this has been made now during this pandemic. With individuals who are forbidden from even having a handshake or even patting a person on the back, the contact comfort that typically can be transferred from one individual to another, to be given to another person, a hug that you would get from your children, you may not be able to get, because the penalty might be that it'll kill you. So the technology right now has no provision for passing on human contact. Early work has been done at this point on robotics and haptics, but I suspect that that will be an area of greater interest as people get further into this pandemic and the need is shown to be greater, because this will unfortunately not be the last pandemic that we have. There probably will be others.
A quick question to which you can give a quick answer. Do you think that many of these new measures will stick around once people can be physically in contact with one another?
The answer to that is, I think absolutely they'll stick around, and for the same kinds of reasons that that we have developed these up to this point. We know, for example, that people routinely used Skype and other techniques to interact with family in other states. What has happened as the access to normal physical establishments has been reduced, we've switched to online shopping, and we've even bought groceries and the like online. Once these conveniences get set up, it's very likely that people will continue to use them because they've become familiar with them and they like them. It's sort of the genie is out of the bottle and it's hard to put it back in.
Okay. Another question is the challenge of how can we teach skills when we can't be with the older person to show them, and that doing so by phone seems very challenging. If I can add in there, there is a group in Canada called the Cyber Seniors that puts seniors together with young people who are technologically very savvy. And they have been doing a series of webinars. So Cyber Seniors, if you Google that, you can still get on to the programs that they're doing this week. And they're really quite good.
That's an excellent point. And one of the things that we see in the International Society for Gerontechnology across the globe is researchers and different networks being set up exactly like what you're talking about, Gloria, to provide assistance for older adults to master these technologies. Not everyone has access to a very technology savvy grandchild. And in this day and age, that access may be limited because of the COVID-19. But there are a number of really good how-to videos. If the person knows how to go to Google and type in a question regarding how do I use Skype, they could wind up getting access to all kinds of different videos on how to do that are at various levels of complexity.
Okay, well, we're off to a very good start, but now we're going to go to the next speaker, who is Jan Grafsman from Finland. Jan is one of the founders, the fathers, the developers of this field of gerontechnology. So it's really a delight and an honor to have him with us this morning. You can read more about his bio on the screen right now. As you can see, he started out as a research engineer in medical technology and has been very much involved in the whole developments of technology for an aging society. So with no further ado, Jan is going to talk to us, and he's on the sexy topic of robotics.
Okay, well, I don't know if I'm sexy. First of all, I'm not a doctor. I'm not a professor. I would describe myself as a social engineering scientist, or I prefer even gerontechnologist. I will give no definition of who is old, because 20 years or 80 years or in the middle somewhere when you're 50, there's no definition of what you can do or what you want to do. I will focus, or I like to focus, on an aging society. And what can engineers do to make that aging society happen? And I refer to very old scholars in this field, like Matilda Riley, social gerontologist, Powell Lawton, and my mentor, Jim Fozar. Next slide, please. A short abstract of what I try to address. First of all, the human environment interaction is existential for us. And we need this interaction to survive disasters of all sorts. In my view, this interaction has two components. What's coming into us? What do we perceive? What can we communicate? What can we tell and do to the people or the technical systems in our environment? And more importantly, and that is the topic of my presentation, how can we control, how can we operate, how can we do things in our environment? There's a lot of research at the moment to find robotic solutions to counterattack this pandemic and other big challenges in space or on Earth. I will only give a brief review of what is happening in robotics, and I hope to show some relevance for our aging population. Next slide, please. Being an engineer, I like schemes. So in these schemes, you see in the top the human system, our sensory, our perceptive systems, our cognition, how do we process the information, and then how do we organize and coordinate physical action. It's depending on how our internal system works. I'm very sorry for the cold approach here, but please try to understand me. Our internal system is brains, nerves, muscles, and our organ systems. Then, in the blue, our outside world. There's controls for any technical device that we are trying to use. And sometimes in the display, we see how fast we drive or how loud the noise is. In between the top, we humans, and the bottom, the technology, the environment, we have interfaces, and we have to interact through those interfaces. And that's where the big challenge is for engineers and designers to make this circle go round and round and round in time. And that's the axis in the bottom, time. There's a question and exclamation mark. Time plays a very big role here in at least 3 dimensions. We have our human system, our biology. We are aging, we are changing over time, and we have to understand that. There's the whole science of gerontology that is doing the research there and can give us maybe some clues and answers. Then there's the blue side, the technology. It is changing faster and faster, and sometimes we cannot cope. Our biological system cannot cope with the pace of change in the technological environment. And then, but I hope that the next speaker will address that, there's also the time dimension of our actual behavior. We all have past experiences, whether we're old or young. We have experience in life. We also, depending not whether we're old or young, but we all have future expectations, and that determines how we act and behave in the reality of today, in our social contexts and the like. Next slide, please. Now I will just go into what we have in robots in our present time. First, domestic robots in and around our house. We do not realize that the earliest technology tools that we had were the hammer, knife, a tweezers, or a helping hand, the grabber to pick something from the floor. These are basically an extension of our manual dexterity, of our mobility, whatever. Things we cannot do with our bare hands can be helped with the use of tools. Then we go a little bit further. Now we have a vacuum cleaner and a lawnmower who do the job for us without our physical powers. There was Manes, which was a development in the Netherlands almost 50 years ago, a tabletop robot arm that could help feeding when you could not ladle your soup out of your own plate. More recently, we have social robots, and you can find them all over the internet. They are still expensive, but they work. In the present time, we have the pickup and delivery robots. We have disinfecting and sanitizing robots, and these robots disinfect and clean better than a professional cleaner. Then we have the diagnostic robots that can come into your home and help you with diagnostics of all sorts, of all your or many of your vital parameters. The big dilemma is here. What does that do to our privacy? How autonomous are these robots are going to operate? Do we want to share our private environments with a robot or a machine? Next slide, please. We have robots in the public domain. Again, the pickup and delivery systems, the diagnostic, testing, tracking systems, public announcements instead of the old big sound systems that made all kinds of public announcements. We can much more make them much more direct. We can use them for quarantine enforcement if we want. The disinfection and sanitation systems can be operated by robots rather than human beings. And monitoring and control of traffic flows. How efficient can you bring the goods in the place where they have to be in the right moment and the right time? And then we can think about robots that help us socialize. Next slide, please. We come to the robots in institutional environments. Think of hospitals, nursing residents, schools, prisons, workplaces, and so on. The disinfection robots using ultraviolet lights and cleaning surfaces. Robots are better than cleaning professionals, and you can use very strong ultraviolet sources to clean and disinfect environments, but only when there's no people around them. Then we have the reception robots in Japan, Taiwan, Singapore, we now have robots in hotels that are temporarily places for people in quarantine, but robots do the hostess function, and they even socialize, or at least make people, visitors, feel at ease. The sanitizing stations, then dispensing of medication and food, and then there's the telepresence. Robots can operate in very complex environments. The picture shows a telemedication, surgical theater, where from a distance robots are doing the surgery. In general, robots can support a safe and seamless supply chain. Next slide, please. My view of robots in the future. I think we should seek, and there are some already, solutions in the hybrid systems. That means a robot who is combined with a professional, a human being, an expert that can do multi-operations and just use the robot to do it in a remote place. Another development is the soft robots. And there I come to what the first speaker said about haptics and feelings and handshakes and name it. Soft robots are developed both in Palo Alto, in Stanford University, and the University of San Diego, California. At least that's what I found. And these soft robots can have a multi-shape, and they can have multi-functions. The next field is the wearable robot and robot implants. We already do have them. What about a ring around your finger with sensors? What about a bracelet with sensors for all or many vital functions? And what about robot implants like an insulin pump or a pain pump? They do exist, but many more functions can be thought of for this type of robots. Then a challenge for everyone. Do-it-yourself robots. If you just go around the internet and look at the do-it-yourself pages, there is a lot of simple tools we can build ourselves. And I do not know yet the spread of 3-dimensional printing machines, but those facilities are very promising. Not only to make a 3D gun or arm system, but for many other purposes. Another thing in the future is the autonomous mini, micro, and nano robots that indeed can travel through the human body. And the last thing, biorobots. Maybe for the next century, but if intelligence, artificial intelligence, is combined with living tissue, with cold technology, there may be biorobots in the next century. It's just a very, very big question mark for me. But I hope they will be there sooner than human clones. Next slide, please. Robots, but then in the air. And I have said there, yes, maybe no. Those are my personal views, but the application of drones to spray disinfectants or radiate UV light, I don't believe it can be used outdoors, but maybe indoors. The remote sensing of vital signs. Within 2 meters, maybe it's possible to use drones. I have no belief in tracking from 50 or 100 meters. It will not work. Audio broadcasting for public awareness. I mentioned that earlier. Cargo delivery and collection. It's possible, but we need trained pilots to steer those drones, and the permissions of the Federal Aviation Authority should be there. And that's a question if they will come. Surveillance of big groups of people. Yes, maybe no, but we have to think about data privacy and protection. The use of aerial QR codes. Maybe just use your smartphone to make a picture of a QR code and you know what to do. Connectivity. Cell phone towers for remote areas, because we have more rural areas than urban areas on our planet. So maybe it can be a good application. And then mapping to plan public services and transport to optimize public services and transport. I believe that is a very good application. And I gave you a source there, Robotics, and this is coming from a recent publication of them. By the way, they are sponsored by the Bill Gates Foundation. Next slide, please. There's many pitfalls in believing in the future use of robotics. The picture you see is the cover of the first proceedings of our Geron Technology Conference in Eindhoven, 1991. And the question mark is still very, very valuable and opportune at this moment. The pitfalls. We have the technology push versus the user needs and demands. We still do not know enough about our older companions in this world, and we need to have more user orientation. Engineers can make a lot of things, but you cannot push it into the market. Next is ethics, privacy, protection, personal control. And I hope that the next speaker will highlight that a little bit more. My concern is accessibility, affordability, acceptance. Still, the interfacing between us people and the technology has many questions to resolve. And last but not least, the legislation and regulation and accountability. Who is responsible for what? Is it the user who buys the product, or is it the engineer who designs it, or is it the administration that provides the legislation and regulation to use it? Big question marks. And finally, resources. And I know the next speaker will address that too. If you have no phone, smartphone, if you have no internet, if you don't have power, electricity, if you don't have clean water, what can be the answer of technology? How can technology help there? Next slide, please. Small number of informative websites. Robotics, Science Daily, Business Insider, Spectrum from the IEEE, that's an engineering organization, Explore, and there's many more. It's worthwhile to go and visit those websites just to get inspiration and find solutions for your daily life. I want to end with one comment. Yesterday, I attended the tele-funeral of my mother. She died, 91 years old, in the Netherlands. I live in Finland. And I can tell you, technology is still far away from the real human touch. But we should try to get there. Thank you.
Thank you, Jan, for a very interesting and stimulating talk. We have a couple of questions. First of all, can robots do things we don't want them to do or cause accidents? That's a concern of a lot of people. Like, do they go off by themselves?
The more intelligent the robots get, probably the more accidents they will cause. It all depends how much we are willing to give away from information we are willing to give away from our daily environment. Robots work with rules, algorithms they are called. And you need many, many algorithms to understand how a person behaves in his daily environment, in his house, in his living room, bedroom, bathroom, whatever. And if those algorithms are not correct or are confusing for the robot, then maybe the robot can make his own interpretations and cause accidents. And it's only because it's not programmed well, or because well, the robot didn't get the right information. We can think of the self-driving cars. Tesla is trying to make them, and still the cars cannot decide if they will brake for a trespassing dog or for something that is just blowing over the road because of a strong wind. So the robots have to be trained, have to be coached, and if the robot is well trained and well coached, it maybe will not cause accidents. But then we have the other side of it, and that's the human being who is served, hopefully, by the robot. If the behavior of the human being is changing in an unexpected way, or if the direct living environment undergoes changes in an unexpected way, a tornado passing by or what have you, then the robot is not trained for that and may cause accidents. So who can predict or expect the unpredictable or the unexpected? It may happen. And maybe robots will get more intelligent in the future, and hopefully, well, not hopefully, maybe people are willing to give away more of their, say, information about their daily behavior and their habits and so on. It's engineers cannot solve it, and the say people cannot solve it either. It has to go hand in hand. A robot hand with a human touch. I hope it comes.
Well, another comment and question that came in was that most of the technology that we are currently talking about is based on smartphones and tablets that require a certain amount of digital literacy. And even with your robot, you've got to know enough to how to turn it on and make the things go. And the questioner was curious whether there are any applications in Geron technology on the more conventional devices like television. Older people do watch a lot of television, or radios that are accessible to a wide range of old people. Are we doing anything new? Are we making our televisions and our radios any smarter?
Well, there are opportunities to make the technology more accessible. I have a strong belief in voice control of any type of robot or computer interface or what have you. But there again, voice control was already, or voice command was already, voice recognition developed by IBM in the 80s of the last century, and it was used for making medical reports. So a medical doctor spoke his report, and a type machine typed it out. Unfortunately, there were 10 to 20% mistakes in that system, and that can mean the difference between death and life. So it is a challenge for engineers and designers to make the products that they try to bring to market, to make them more accessible. I have an old adagium that says, if the manual for your smartphone, so the booklet that comes with it, is heavier than the smartphone itself, then it's not a useful smartphone. In general, as long as we need manuals of 100 pages to explain how to use your TV or your smartphone or your robot, then it's just a bad design. And it's so it's not an answer to your question, but it is a challenge for engineers to make the use of their products more transparent and more easy.
Well, I thought that was a very interesting answer, and certainly there's lots of jokes going around about using the voice controls on the Echo or the various kinds of devices that are there now. So thank you very much, and we'll now go on to our next speaker, and that is Dr. Kort from the Netherlands. And she is trained as a Geron technologist and worked with Annelies von Brunswick, who a number of us know as having been one of the leaders, the developers, the pioneers in this field. And as you can see from the slide, she's a full professor and chair of the Building Healthy Environments for the Future Users at the Technical University of Technology, or the University of Technology in Eindhoven. And she's also president of the Dutch-Flemish chapter of ISG and the editor of our newsletter. So, Hilly, take it away.
Thank you, Gloria. Thank you for organizing this, but also thank you, Magnus and Aspen. I know you are there for organizing this. So I will focus more on the technology solutions we currently have to battle against the COVID-19 virus. So I want to try to have it more in an interactive way. This because my voice will, I hope I can keep up with the presentation with my voice the whole time. So I have some short instructions for you, so how you can interactive participate. And then I will say something about apps for contamination monitoring, and then elaborate some more on the perspective of aging adults and get you through the during technology perspective. So looking at the instruction, well, at certain point I will have like a statement, and you can use the chat box as you did to say, well, I disagree, I agree, or I have an alternative. If you do have an alternative, then type your alternative in the chat box, and after the presentation we can discuss. I have used A, B, and C, but if you are more savvy with the chat box, then of course you can use your thumb up, thumb down, or use a smiley. So in apps for contamination monitoring, so these are introduced because traditionally public health workers will work on contact search, and this is still done by hand. So to support and replace the work of public health workers and to help them and to facilitate this work, several apps are being developed and are in place right now for us to work with to identify contamination or COVID patients. It's also used to isolate those at risk, because if somebody calls to their public health service and say, well, I've been diagnosed with the COVID-19 virus, then the search will be done, the contact search will be done, and it's still done in most countries by hand. It takes a lot of hours, although it's now done very more quicker because the more people are aware about this virus. And it's also to give people some guidelines about their treatment, what they can do at home, and also how they can cure. So the apps at this moment are for community testing, as for instance is done in South Korea, and it's also to identify those who don't have symptoms, because some people might carry the virus, but they don't show the symptoms. And it's also to stop outbreaks and to identify the outbreaks and to inform people that they have contact with people who did have the virus. In some cases, these apps are apps used by smartphones, and it differs per country and per apps that the data will be stored 15 days or 21 days, and the data is stored on your phone. So I have identified, and maybe there are more, 3 types of apps monitoring for the COVID-19 virus. There are tracking apps, so they track, so to trace who you are in contact with, and these differ per countries. You have tracking app who will trace for a certain of days, and you have tracking apps who will trace you, who will trace those who are in 100 meters around you. There are also apps, and that can also be combined with this tracking app to identify the person who has the COVID-19 virus. And there are apps, so that's after a person is diagnosed with the COVID-19 virus, to monitor these patients. So I have done some search, and the time was limited, but as you can see in this table, so, and this is random because there are also apps in Colombia, and there is also app in Finland, as we heard. But as you can see from this table, you can see the names of the app are different, all battling the COVID-19 virus. We have different kinds of names of apps. The apps are mostly tracking apps, or in some cases, sorry, or in some cases combined with identifying or monitoring. And usually the apps are on the basis of voluntary. In South Korea and in Poland, the app use is mandatory. In Poland, the app, so the Kwarantanna domowa, is used for those who are diagnosed, and the patients are mandatory to use the app so that the public health organization can monitor their symptoms. In South Korea, it's different. There is to identify people. So if you enter South Korea, then it's mandatory for you to use this app, and so the public health organization can follow you and monitoring you where you are, and in case you will develop the COVID, you will have the COVID-19 virus, they will know in which environment you have been and in which surrounding. And also, and there are other apps like the Covidome in France. That's an app which is for monitoring, and in this monitoring app, that is so an initiative by healthcare workers from the hospital, that is to monitor those who do have the COVID-19 virus. And in Australia, you probably have seen it in the news already, because I think Australia, together with South Korea, was one of the first countries who started with this, is that it's about tracking. So it's a voluntary base. The data will be stored on your telephone for 21 days. And as you can notice, it's, so as I said, different type of apps. And sometimes it's combination. And this is not a complete overview. I already want to invite those who are interested in this topic to write a manuscript together with me, so that we can have more a deep insight in these apps and how they work and which technology they use, and how it's and how they take the perspective of older people into account. So now we have to go to the instruction. So I have a statement that all countries should develop an app to track for contamination. And I will give you time to type your answer. And I can see some of the answers, and everybody can see some of the answers. I'm scrolling down. This is going very fast. I'm scrolling down, not just seeing the answer yet. But maybe we also can discuss this afterwards, if you have to think about this. Okay. And the other statement is that maybe all applications looking at the severeness of this virus, that maybe all applications should be mandatory. And if you have an alternative, please type it on the chat box so we know. I will continue. So looking at the perspective of aging people, and looking, of course, related to the virus, aging people can relate to this COVID-19 virus with regard to tuberculosis. From their, even the oldest also, they know the tuberculosis, they know about this virus, and also some of them are maybe exposed to other types of virus. So that's just what they know. If you have a virus, and even younger people, they know about virus, and everybody can relate, of course, to the normal flu virus, can relate to this. Older people can also relate to, well, if I'm sick, if I'm feeling not well, I will visit my doctor, I will visit my general practitioner or my community nurse or the home care nurse to discuss my symptoms and to see how I can be treated or not. Visiting the doctors or the nurse is all related to a kind of trust. So in the relation between patient and family doctor and a general practitioner, trust is very relevant. So because they have a familiar face, they can see somebody, they can talk to somebody, and also, as mentioned, you will also be touched, which is also relevant. If you leave or if you enter somewhere, they will shake your hand, tap your shoulder. So that's kind of trust and also touch, and it's a social interaction. If we look at the current situation, people has to grasp that the COVID-19 virus, so that's related to the health, could really affect their lungs. That their lungs, so that's not only to the upper respiratory organs, but their lungs really could be affected. And looking for from the perspective of aging people, but more from a technology vision, is that in some cases, certainly in the beginning of this corona crisis, there were virtual visits, which were some complicated for some older people. Or people have to use their smartphone. As I mentioned, we have now several apps on your smartphone all over the world, different names, kind of similar, but also not. So older people need to use this technology literacy, need to use these smartphones. If you look from privacy and ethics, it's that they need to have a kind of protection while they stay at home, because the regulation in some countries are still stay at home, don't leave your house. In Europe and also other parts in China, the regulations are somewhat loosened now so that you can leave at home. But actually, the government is saying you have to stay at home. So this crisis is actually forcing older people to use, well, at least, well, the landlines, the phones, when they can call the doctor, if they can call the doctor. But when diagnosed with the COVID-19 version, or if they are going outside, they need to have a smartphone. So this app can be placed on their smartphone. If they are staying at home, or when they are isolated in nursing homes, because nursing homes, at least in the Netherlands, are still closed for visitors, that will bring also some privacy and ethical questions. Because if somebody lives alone, they might be used to be staying at home alone, but then again, they are not able to see their friends and families, and if they have grandchildren, to visit their grandchildren. Furthermore, certainly in the beginning of this crisis in the Netherlands, we became in 1 second more and more dependent from others, especially older people, because the regulations were stay at home, don't go outside your house. And so for some people, and especially those older and who were and are at risk, they needed to buy their groceries. So this is it's not an existing website. It's something I made up. They need to buy their grocery online because there was no other option to buy your grocery, and because some couldn't visit their supermarket. So as I said, the apps are developed in several countries. Apps are placed on smartphones, and I don't know, and I didn't have the time to search how smartphone use is in other countries, but at least in the Netherlands, what we see that 65 plus of the older people. So these are the latest, recent numbers. 71.9%, so almost 72% of the 65 plus do have a smartphone. But if you see that for the 75 plus, that it's only 51.9% do have a smartphone. So that means that almost half of the 75 plus population, they don't have a smartphone at all. And I can imagine that in other countries, these percentages might be higher, but I also can imagine that these percentages in other countries might be far lower. And of course, what you can expect that if people are higher educated, that it's like in the Netherlands, almost 100% has smartphones. So it seems like the app development, and of course, I do realize that it had to be done quick and good and very fast, but they don't take into account the use of smartphones. If you do live in a country where it will be mandatory, then you will need to have a smartphone as well. So older people, I believe, need to be provided with a smartphone, because in this case, a smartphone will become a device similar to the introduction of the use of a medical device, similar to the introduction as an aid to stay at home and to monitor your health. Smartphones are of course coming from the commercial market, but I can imagine that in some cases or in some regions or in some markets, if the app is mandatory, then you also need to have a smartphone. Furthermore, for older people, they need to get explanation about the storage of the data, because data on a phone, if you are used to a landline phone, so people understand that there will be no data. But if you have this phone, a smartphone, then data will be stored. So actually you have a mini computer in your hand. So what about the data? How can the data be stored? And this needs to be very clearly explained to older person, especially in those regions when the government is saying, well, it's voluntary. A good explanation will help to enhance the use of this app. Also relevant is that older people need to know what their rights are when using the app. Can they refuse the app? Will that not affect the care they can take from the doctor? Can they still get care? Can they still do the grocery or any other shopping as usual? So when people live at home, and luckily a lot of older people live at their own house, they need to have some support for activity of daily living. And as the first speaker mentioned, there are several video apps which can be used to be in contact with friends and family. But as I said, the COVID-19 virus, the corona crisis, forced people to use online services. So not only for their grocery, but also for all other kinds of services. Or when you were, if you have in your classes, or when you were when you were in a choir or in a music group, all went to online. And in some cases, you need to have a subscription. And I think this is down. And older people should be giving the opportunity to get more easily access to get this subscription online. I luckily had a subscription already 3 years ago, which I didn't use for online services. But I have, in my environment, several older people said, well, I'm stuck. I cannot go to the supermarket. I cannot live my life as I choose, because now everything is online and there is this huge waiting list and they don't take into account my wishes and my needs. So it's a short period, but I've wrote this also with regard to the action from the Brazilian group, especially from Dr. Carla Santana Castro, with her concern about how older people are addressed during this corona crisis. And indeed, yes, older people should be educated to be aware about the pros and cons of using video app, whether it's Zoom, Skype, or anything else. We aren't allowed to use Zoom at the university, for instance, because it's not very safe. And they should get very simple, easy instruction, maybe similar as the second speaker announced, with a very thin booklet about how to use your background, that if you have your background, that everybody can see your background environment. So how can you adjust that so that it's not seen by others? How can you give privacy to your own home environment? Do you want to share this, yes or no? And how can you stop and refuse incoming calls if you don't want to have incoming calls? So, and there, of course, are several items which needs to be addressed. So older people should be educated to be, oh, this I already had. Also to be educated about safe use of the video app. So the screens, the sound, the exchange of data and pictures. So who will receive it, but also, as I said, about the online service, low threshold access for online services. So again, a statement, and I'm not sure whether you will get the statement on the chat box. So concerning older people, apps should be restricted to monitoring at home. And then you can say, well, I disagree or agree, or if you have an alternative. So more in the environment from e-health at home. The other statements relate to the pandemic. So the pandemic is necessitating all citizens, including older people, to use more online services than before. And I'm very curious how this is the case in your own country. So I'm changing to see, and I can see some A, B, C, and so on. Okay, I'll change back. So for some of you in the German Technology Society, this might be a very known image. This is to introduce you to the German technology perspective. In the German technology perspective, the age and generation matrix looks at the combination of the target population and the technology generation. So remember, I started to mention the apps, the different apps to track, identify, or to monitor the COVID-19 virus. And as you can see, and we don't have the time to do this exercise, but some of you there who know me, if we have done this exercise, there is no consideration about the target population of the older people, whether it's the first age, the second age, the third age. And there is even no consideration of this current app. And I do understand, and I'm very aware about the the necessity to have these apps fast and fast running due to this crisis. But it doesn't take account the technology generations, because the apps currently most of the currently apps are actually, which is on the gaming software technology generation, or even which is not here yet, the cloud generation. So the generation who understand the clouds. If we look at the gerontechnology perspective, so from technology and gerontology, so the cross-section of the technology and gerontology, of course, we all understand, and the technology from gerontechnology perspective is in information and communication. This is when it concerns the apps as I have introduced. So not speaking about the robots as the second speaker has done. And we can see that for gerontechnology, apps can be either on sociology, demographics, or medicine and rehabilitation. So the medicine one and the rehabilitation ones are those apps related to monitoring. So when people are already diagnosed with the COVID-19 virus. So less attention is being given to the gerontechnology perspective. So, and my statement is that the gerontechnology community should actively offer their expertise concerning technology development and aging people. And the other statements relate to that the gerontechnology community should take into account health and technology literacy level of older people. So how to which health or to which technology literacy level do they which health or which technology literacy level do older people have? Okay. To conclude, in this presentation, I aim to enhance the awareness of privacy and ethical issues regarding older persons when designing apps for COVID-19. So tracking, identifying, or monitoring. But also to show that gerontechnology can help to take into account the perspective of aging people when designing apps for COVID-19. I missed something, and also the presentations aim to contribute to thinking about the perspective of aging people with an emphasis on privacy and ethics. And of course, in our journal, we have several publications from all over the world which relate to app development, especially for this aging population. And of course, we hope to see you soon. Thank you for your attention.
Well, thank you for a very interesting presentation. Thank you, Hilly, for a very interesting presentation. If there are any burning questions, would you please type them in? Our time is getting short. So what I would like to do while we're waiting to see if there are any more questions come in is to ask Espen Aspenes, who is the chair of our next World Congress, which was to take place originally in May and has now been postponed until October, to give us an update on the situation. Espen?
Thank you all for your presentations. I hope today's presentations inspire you to attend the 12th World Conference on Gerontechnology in Trondheim. The conference was originally supposed to be in May, but as the COVID-19 pandemic began to develop, the conference was postponed to October, and as you can see, we have published a second call for abstracts with a deadline of June the 1st. The purpose is to provide the opportunity to publish research results that were not major enough by the original deadline in November 2019. We are particularly interested in abstracts that highlight the important role of drone technology in a period of viral pandemic or disaster. We are closely monitoring the evaluation of the pandemic and as it stands right now, we will shortly discuss a further postponement of the conference to 2021. Therefore, we encourage everyone to follow the website. Thank you.
Well, thank you. This brings us to a close of what I think was a very interesting webinar. This was a new activity for the International Society for Geron Technology. Do give us some feedback. Let us know how you enjoyed this. Let us know what other topics would be of interest, and we may be able to continue and to have more of these webinars. Also, as Espen said, please do check back with the website so that we keep you on track as to whether we will in fact be able to meet. Hopefully things will settle down and it will be possible, perhaps with some combination of both on-site sessions and remote sessions. I also encourage you to go to the website of the International Society for Geron Technology and to consider becoming a member. This is a really interesting group of people. They are somewhat different than those who attend the Gerontological Society meetings or who may meet to attend the meetings of the engineers or the various people that comprise those who both develop technology and do research about them. And also, of course, there were a group of strong advocates and people from NGOs who are interested in older people and in ways that we can assist them, both to deal with this current pandemic and also to enhance their everyday life. Hopefully we will return to a new normal, but we will need to adapt. And I think our speakers have given us some ideas to think seriously about in terms of expecting the people within the older population who are very heterogeneous, a very diverse group. We've got those who are very techno-savvy, some who are not so savvy, and some who, of course, have cognitive impairments. So we need to think about the diversity within the seniors population when we think about applications of technology and who can do what for whom, who can learn. And as our first speaker said, we also want to enhance the communication, the ability for people to still be with people, even if they're not physically present. So on that note, I would bid you adieu. Thank you for attending this webinar. And like I said, please do give us your feedback. We value your attention and your contributions to the life of older people.